There are 5 reasons why most inventors fail. Stay tuned so you can learn how you can avoid these pitfalls. Hi, I'm Lisa Lloyd, and I've been helping independent inventors for almost 30 years now, as well as inventing, patenting, and licensing my own products. Currently, I'm 7 for 7 and in the process of negotiating my 8th invention. And I'll tell you what, in a business that's fraught with failure, in fact, it's estimated that less than 2% of all independent inventors ever make more than $1 on their invention. So let's talk about the 5 most common mistakes independent inventors make and how you can avoid those pitfalls. The first, and what I think is probably the biggest mistake that independent inventors make, is that they invent solutions for problems that aren't big enough for enough people. So in other words, if you are going about your day and you have that aha moment, as we all do, and say there's got to be a better way, the first question to ask yourself is, not that it isn't a real problem. We're not diminishing the fact that you believe that there's a real problem there, but the question is it a big enough problem? In other words, does it hurt enough for enough people? In other words, is the universe of potential customers big enough? And by potential customers, I mean, are there enough people who hurt that much that it's worth investing your time, resources, heart, soul, sweat into bringing that product to market? Number 2, and it's followed closely behind number 1, is poor solutions seem to be one of the probably even more so in my case, because by the time most people come to me for help, they've already engineered it. And so poor solutions are a big challenge because you've either over-engineered or you've under-engineered your solution. Maybe your solution isn't quite elegant enough, and by that I mean it's not faster, cheaper, smarter, stronger, somehow more economical, more efficient than all of the other competition that is on the market. And I can't tell you how many times people come to me and said, but there's nothing like it. And we spend about 5 minutes on the computer together, and sure enough, I can flip the screen around and show them after a quick Google search, there are dozens of other solutions aiming to solve the same problem. Maybe not the same way. So by poor solutions, and one of the ways to overcome this particular challenge is to understand that you have to invent solutions that are dramatically better than all of the competition. So when you take the time to investigate, number 1, that it's a big enough problem for enough people, the next step is to identify how to solve the problem in a way that is dramatically better than all of that competition. And number 3 is not getting it in front of the right people to license. So my assumption here is that you're interested in licensing your product. Maybe it's to find investors, and it's relatively the same challenge. If you don't put it in front of the right people, you're pitching the wrong people. Now that seems like a silly thing to say, but believe me when I tell you, over and over again, I hear from clients, and I do a lot of free consultations, and the challenge that people are finding is they don't know how to get it in front of the right people. And when they tell me the backstory, they've been reaching out to retailers, for example. Well, retailers, Bed Bath & Beyond, in fact, just happened yesterday. A client asked me about pitching it to Bed Bath & Beyond. Retailers don't license. Licenses are done by the manufacturer or the distributor. So if you want to find those guys, you go to the store and you go to the aisle of the type of product that you're going to sell, fitness equipment is in this example, and you would look at the back of the packaging and see who the manufacturer or the distributor is. That company with that brand is making and selling those goods into those stores. That's who you license your product to. So calling on retailers is going to be a no-go. I had another example recently with a client who has a product in the party supply business, and she ended up calling on some, her device helps, wow, her device helps hang piñatas better, and so she was calling on piñata manufacturers. Well, the challenge there is they don't make plastic goods or metal goods, and the materials that her product were made out of are really molded and manufactured in a very different way from the way piñatas are. So they wouldn't be, even though it makes sense that they would sell her product, they're not in the position to manufacture that product. And so unless they're willing to change their manufacturing process, they're not the right company for her to be calling on either. So at the end of the day, one of, like I said, the 3rd biggest reason that I see is that people get stuck with not knowing who to call on and keep getting all these rejections and wondering why they can't succeed, and it's just because they're not in front of the right people. Number 4, and this is where it gets a little hairy, number 4 is wrecking the pitch. This is not too hard to do, especially if you're not a professional salesperson, and frankly, most people aren't. In fact, most creative people aren't comfortable selling at all because they have that bias in the back of their head that somehow that makes them greasy or slimy or whatever. But the reality is, if you believe in your product, you owe it to the world to share it with the right companies who can license it so that it can get into the hands of the world. So you're not really selling, you're introducing people to your concept. And you can wreck the pitch very easily, and the mistake that I see most commonly made is with the sell sheet being off. So you'll never get in the front door, and in our business there's a best practice to create a sell sheet. A sell sheet is a simple 8.5 by 11 that you would submit to the company for consideration and hopefully to open the door for a discussion about whether or not your product is worth licensing and a good fit for them. So if you show up with a sell sheet or you email a sell sheet that jumps straight into the solution, what happens most often is your assumption being that they understand the problem, and they don't. And they read the sell sheet and you've jumped right into your features and benefits, and I don't care how whiz-bang that presentation is. If they don't agree with you that the problem, remember number one, is big enough for enough people, then they're not interested in your product. It doesn't matter how whiz-bang it is. It has to be a big enough problem for enough people. And if you assume that they know that that problem is big enough for enough people, then the assumption should also go with that they should be already making something to solve that problem. They're probably not making it because they haven't recognized the problem, which means it's your job to sell them as much on the problem and gain agreement as you do on your solution, and why it is so much better than all of the competition out there. So be deliberate about telling your story well. Don't wreck the pitch. Don't miss that opportunity. And remember, the original pitch, that sell sheet, or in some cases a pitch deck, is necessary, which I don't have time to talk about today. That first impression is the only impression you get. So make sure that you avoid number 4, which is wrecking the pitch by having a sell sheet that dives right into your solution and doesn't gain agreement on the problem first. And number 5 is people just quit. They just give up. It can be a numbers game, although I wouldn't define it by the numbers at all, because if you live by the numbers, you'll die by the numbers. But basically, after perhaps making one or even all of these mistakes, giving up altogether instead of recognizing the learnings and pivoting, which means, changing course as you learn what's working and what's not. So taking the time to observe what happens in each step of the path and allowing it to shape your thinking about your process and reconsider, do I need to go back to the drawing board and reinvent a better solution? Do I need to scrap this because it turns out it's really not a big enough problem for enough people, which, by the way, isn't failure. The reason I say quitting is failing is because changing products, pivoting and looking for the next problem to solve is not a failed inventor. In fact, it makes an inventor. Failure is a part of our process. If you're inventing, you're learning, that means you're experimenting, and you don't always get it right. In fact, the reason that I have 7 successful products and an 8th one on the way that I'm in the middle of negotiating now and have had the tremendous success and beat those odds isn't because every idea I ever had is the one that I brought to market. But I've had many more ideas where I started the process, and I have a process that I go through that allows me to investigate the answers to all of the questions and these challenges, beginning with, is the problem big enough for enough people? And then ultimately only going through the patenting process and then finally successfully licensing that patent because of that early stage development. So quitting is the 5th and final reason that inventors fail, especially in the beginning, first-time inventors. So don't let the fear of the unknown stop you. Learn what you need to know. There is no reason why you can't succeed. It's only a lack of information. And believe me when I tell you, anybody can do this. Anyone can do this. Anyone can do this. I didn't go to college. I took a couple classes, but I'm your classic dropout. I barely made it through high school with my ADD, as a classic entrepreneur spirit would have. And if I can do it, believe me when I tell you, anybody can do it. learn what you need to know. Quit looking for get-rich-quick schemes. That is not what this business is about. It does take work, but you can invent your future and your income. So, thank you so much for listening. Be sure, if you like this video, click on subscribe and like below. And if you would, please be so kind to leave a comment. Let me know if there's another, a sixth or a seventh reason that you think we should add to this list, or that it's been helpful for you. Thank you so much. Mwah. Love you all. Happy inventing.